Hey YouTube, we are back with a tier 10 bugs, primary weapons, secondary weapons, and grenades tier list. We're going to try and do an all-encompassing one for the new difficulty that has been released. There's definitely been some shakeups because with the increased amount of enemy spawns, especially with like the higher tier enemies, like the new brood commanders, definitely looking at weapons a lot more critically on how much ammo they definitely have and suggesting them in more of loadouts for, you know, your supply backpack and so on and so forth. Just before we get into it, I want to start doing something more often where I try to explain my thought process for every tier. Okay. So people can better understand why I'm putting something in a particular spot. So when I typically look at S tier in these loadouts, I'm talking about a weapon that has very many upsides and very few downsides. Something that you can take like without much thought into your loadout and it'll perform extremely well in most situations. A tier is a solid weapon. It has many upsides. It probably has one or two downsides that, or it's like maybe you got an enemy that it literally can't deal with, which gives it a distinct like good rating, but not anything that is better. B is like, it's okay, right? It's okay. You can utilize it, but you're definitely going to be struggling to kill quite a few enemies with it. Maybe it's good for one particular scenario, but then it doesn't really perform all that well in a bunch of others. And then needs a buff, I think, is fairly, or C and needs a buff are fairly self-explanatory. C tier is, you know, your tier that we're going to use to describe weapons that are like literally just quite bad, and maybe just bad because you're fighting the wrong enemy faction, or that they're like they've been power crept out of existence. And a good example, I guess, would be like the Breaker Spray and Pray. Needs a buff, very clear that this is a weapon that I would just absolutely not use unless it gets a buff, essentially. Okay, starting off, we have the Cookout. This is a Punisher variant with incendiary rounds. You get less damage, but you get incendiary rounds, which is a huge boon for tier 10. Because I'm sure you've gone and done some missions, and some variants have crazy amounts of hunters, leapers, scavengers, warriors, and so on and so forth. You are doing a ridiculous amount of damage per shot. Okay, I highly recommend giving the Cookout a try if you have it unlocked. A ton of stagger and good ammo economy overall. Not like the best ammo economy in the game, but if you're someone who doesn't like having to deal with magazines and like potentially wasting ammo, the Cookout might be for you. The alternate to that is still the Incendiary Breaker. Even though it lost 2 magazines, it still has a better shot count than the Cookout. So you can light more potential enemies on fire. Just please don't be that person that sees a bug breach and just holds down the trigger, spamming all their rounds in like 10 seconds. Take your time. Tap fire. Light as many enemies. Like, your goal when using it should be lighting as many enemies on fire as possible per magazine, right? And bringing this in a loadout that is bringing a supply backpack will stop you from having to worry about ammo. But you can still bring it without it. Just make sure that you're paying attention to your supply cooldown and just be watching for POIs for ammo. You know, you can still absolutely use this thing. But if you don't want to have to worry about the ammo economy nearly as much, you have the Cookout. The Cookout has its strengths and its weaknesses compared to the Breaker Incendiary. There's still a place for the Breaker Incendiary as like that high DPS weapon that you need up close and a longer range, lots of fire damage, even more than the Cookout if you need that. Punisher is a solid A pick still for bugs, in my opinion, probably closer to A-. Lots of stagger, good amount of damage because it does do more damage than the Cookout. And I do like it for like pushing back enemies and just dealing with chaff in general. Hey, Luna, you're so cute. The Breaker is like a solid B- until they give it its previous like damage and magazine and so on and so forth. I don't think I'm going to put it anywhere higher than like B-, C+. It also probably even deserves a magazine on top of that, just so you can actually utilize it more often in those bug missions. Breaker Spray and Pray is just in a completely awkward position still. Like I think it's like a B-, C+ weapon. It has worse handling. It has 1 extra round in the chamber or in the magazine than the Incendiary Breaker. It does less damage than the Incendiary Breaker, and it doesn't have incendiary damage, right? So the only thing it has going for it is 10% fire rate over the Incendiary Breaker, and it has like some extra magazines, including like 4 extra, which is nice. Don't get me wrong. That's great. But I can kill significantly more enemies on the bug front with Incendiary Breaker than the Spray and Pray. Like it's not even really close if you're not spamming it. If you want to spam a shotgun and not have to worry about it, that's the Spray and Pray. But the Spray and Pray needs more. It needs better damage. It needs better handling. I heard Thick Fillet say the other day that like he wants it to see like, I think it's like 40 rounds or something like that. hey, that'd be sick. If it had like the similar magazine count that it did now and a 40 round magazine and maybe some more damage, all of a sudden the spray and pray goes way up on the tier list, probably even sitting around a B+ or A-, depending on how it like ends up performing, right? So, but in its current state, I cannot recommend it. I think someone using the Incendiary Breaker just tap firing is significantly more beneficial to your team. All right, Slugger, I think is in a fairly good spot. I could see it be a little bit higher or a little bit lower depending on how people feel about it. It's a high accuracy demand weapon. You're not really going to be using it for hunters. It's quite hard to, you know, one tap all those hunters and, you know, constantly keep like all the other enemies away from you because you're only really dealing with one enemy at a time. But it is fairly good against warriors, hive commanders, or hive guardians, and brood commanders, especially the new ones. It's 3 tap to the brood commander's head, and you're pushing it away while you're doing it. It's fairly good. I highly recommend for people that are like maybe bringing a support weapon that more or less deals with your hunters, but you need something to deal with brood commanders and ball spears if they spawn. It's a solid pick. I do recommend. You just need a high degree of accuracy. Punisher Plasma is in a bit of a weird one for me. Part of me wants to continue putting it in A just because of how much CC it has and decent AoE, but I feel like I would rather have different AoE weapons versus those enemies, especially when they're coming out in mass. The ammo economy on it is not as strong as other like mass area killing enemies, such as like the Incendiary Breaker. And I don't love the fact that like if an enemy gets too close to me, I can't use the weapon anymore without potentially doing damage to myself or ragdolling myself. Some may say skill issue, but that is an inherent flaw to the weapon that an enemy just can't get too close to you. It's incredibly deadly to yourself. So I'm going to put it A- for now. It may change throughout the tier list, but B+ A- I think is a pretty fair position for it. If you do get lucky enough to get it in a Bile Spear variant, it's very good for those missions. But, you know, because we don't quite know yet when we're going to get intel on our missions, please, Airhead, add that as soon as possible. I want to know when I'm dealing with Bile Spears, please. Until we have that, you know, I can't really put it any higher, in my opinion. The Torture is a somewhat fun weapon, but it's inherently flawed in the sense that, like, hunters will just bully you. It's fun to use on missions that are, like, on lower difficulties and, like, lighting the ground on fire, and then enemies walk into it, and they will slowly burn over time. But as a primary weapon, and how much damage and lack of stagger it has, I can't really recommend it on tier 10 missions. I think it's fairly fun, but if I'm going to be bringing a flamethrower, I'd either bring the support weapon that just does more damage per second, or I'll bring the secondary, which, you know, it's a less contested spot, the secondary spots. So I can't necessarily recommend the Torture on higher difficulties. It's fun on lowers, but it needs a little bit more love. Or in general, I've been saying for flame weapons, I feel like they should stagger or push back enemies in general. Like if an enemy is in the plume of your fire, they shouldn't be continuing to walk at you and then start mailing you or jump at you. Like, think about how much better the flamethrowers would be if, like, a hunter, if it was jumping at you and had the flame, you know, right there, you could stagger it and push it back. It'd be so much better. So much better. All right, going into the next one, the Blitzer. The Blitzer has been something we've been discussing quite a bit on stream lately on whether or not it deserves to be an S tier. I think overall it does, but I still bounce back and forth on it. It's great because the fire rate is awesome. The damage is great. It's medium pen, as you already know that. They also buffed it. A lot of people aren't talking about how they buffed the Blitzer's like accuracy and how reliable it is at killing enemies and not aiming at dead bodies. So a lot of people are kind of not focusing on that, but it was there and it is a lot more consistent. It's still not 100%, which is another reason why I'm not quite putting it in S tier range. It doesn't have more than 20 something meters of range also, which is another reason why I'm like struggling on putting it there. But what it does have is unlimited ammo, tons of stagger, very easy to use, and it pairs well. Just it has another downside that I didn't mention. Dealing with chargers like legs that are unarmored is very awkward because how electric weapons work is they always try to go center mass, and then you need to try and position yourself where the leg is in between that center mass point and your weapon. You can technically deal with a charger, but it's incredibly awkward with the Blitzer. Even trying to shoot its butt, it most of the time just does not work. So if they ever change the Blitzer to have multiple aim points depending on which one you're closest to, it would probably perform a lot better. I'm just going to let it dance between S- and A+. Maybe we might change it by the end of the tier list. All right, Scorcher is kind of falling on my tier list to some extent, and I think it's mostly down to ammo economy. It is still the best primary weapon, in my opinion, for taking out chargers. Flanking a charger, stunning them, and then just unloading about like half a clip into their butt. It blows up, they will die, you just walk off, right? But when you're dealing with a lot of the chaff, and there is a ton of chaff, if you don't have a support weapon that can kill those things or bring a supply backpack, your ammo economy will be looking worse than even the Incendiary Breaker or any other weapon here for a lot of it. Because it's typically a 1 to 2 shot on a hunter, and you're going to be looking at far more for a Hive Guardian, a Brood Commander, and so on and so forth. So you just can go through a magazine so fast. But what's nice about it is at least it can kill chargers very effectively, and that's why it still maintains that A spot. Just try to bring it with a loadout that either has a support weapon that can support it or a supply backpack. Purifier is still in a very awkward position for bugs. It still needs that longer charge time equals more damage. It's been rumored that it's in the code, and they originally kind of sold us as that was this kind of weapon. I still think that the medium pen and the explosive radius and the stagger still makes it a fairly good weapon, but it's like a B- C+ weapon. I do think it's more useful than the Torture Breaker Incendiary as like a weapon that I would bring with maybe like an MG42 or something like that as like a long range stagger for dealing with, bile spears, because it is good at dealing with bile spears and like enemies. But because it has such a long charge time as well, if they could reduce the charge time, it would immediately go up to B tier more reliably. But I just see it as more of a bot weapon, a long range, bullying bot weapon at the moment than a bug weapon. Dominator still deserves to be in S tier. It is your medium pen monster. If you need to kill something that medium pen benefits, you use this. It's still very good at killing chargers. Aim for the butt. A lot of people don't realize that. It's about like 1/3 half the mag to the butt of a charger, which you can unload pretty fast. Brood Commanders, it's a 2-tap. Hive Guardians, I believe it's a 2-tap. You can 1-tap Warriors. If the handling doesn't bother you too much, it's a fantastic weapon, especially if you put on the new armor, and some of you are already wearing it because you're using it with the other support weapons. I do really love using this thing in a lot of bug missions. What I might do is like bring like the, like I might bring like the HMG, or I might bring like an AT weapon or something along those lines. But then if I'm struggling against Brood Commanders, I can bring this. And then my other teammates are bringing Breaker Incendiaries or Cookouts, so I don't need to worry about Hunters as much. So I'll take care of the Brood Commanders. So you can kind of specialize with this weapon because it just does so well versus medium pen enemies. Eruptor is still going to maintain that like A tier for me. It has so much utility. And if you utilize the stratagem window to cycle the rounds faster, because you can increase your fire rate significantly by opening the stratagem window, it's fantastic. If you don't do the stratagem window, it's probably like a middle B. Like the utility is still really high. The AoE is really high. The stagger is really high, but it lacks fire rate and overall like killing ability if you don't have that fire rate. Like it's really good versus like large groups of enemies, but like I said, if you don't have that fire rate, you're going to struggle to deal with those enemies before they get to you. And once they get to you, you're not using this in close range. It's very similar to the Punisher Plasma in that regard. But at least the Eruptor has the ability to kill hives, right? All those buggles, which is really nice. Exploded Crossbow is like a B+ for me. I would rather use the Eruptor overall. And I feel like, especially in the harder difficulty now, I don't have as much ammo as I want to. And it's nice to be able to run away and like one hand the crossbow, which I love that change. It's a really interesting change to kind of differentiate itself from the Eruptor. But unless they just like took away the animation cancel for the Eruptor, I'm not really using the crossbow. I'm just going to pick the Eruptor in most circumstances. But I feel like if you're not doing the animation cancel for the Eruptor, you're probably going to prefer the crossbow overall because of the faster fire rate overall. So keep that in mind, see if you want to do that or not going forward. The Sickle, solid A+ tier, light pen, AR. It's the only AR that truly has enough ammo because it essentially has unlimited ammo. No recoil, really good scope, 80 round magazine essentially. If you go from 0 heat to 100, it fires forever. It feels like it's like your primary version of the Stalwart in some degree is how I usually put it. Really enjoy using this thing paired with a support weapon that's dealing with maybe the bigger enemies. Like I would maybe pair this with like the autocannon if you don't want to bring the Cookout and Incendiary Breaker, just for dealing with those like mass hordes of like hunters and stuff like that. Still quite a good weapon. Highly recommend, and we'll see what they do to other ARs because they need some love. The Adjudicator is a solid B+ AR. It has medium pen. Tap firing can make it fairly decent versus hunters, but you have to have a high degree of accuracy for tapping those mouths so you can like get the 1-2 shot kills. I do wish that all ARs that weren't the energy ARs just had like at least 2 more magazines in reserve. They just need it in even the lower difficulties, but especially on the higher difficulties. You're just going through your ammo far too fast, and the average player is not like 1-2 tapping enemies. They're spraying at enemies, and it's taking significantly more shots than like the optimal TTK, right? So Arrowhead, if you're listening, please give it more ammo in reserve. It's just so necessary. People are not using the ARs the way I think you are designing your enemies. Concussive, Liber Concussive is like a C, but it's like a C minus needs buff. Like there's no reason really to use it. It's kind of similar to the Breaker Spray and Pray, where it has another weapon that just does everything it does, but better. But the Spray and Pray at least has a lot of ammo in reserve. The Concussive, Liber Concussive, I'm just gonna bring the Pummeler every time. The Pummeler is just a better weapon than the Liber Concussive. It has better stats, essentially the same damage, or actually it has the same damage, right? And it needs essentially the same damage and like more fire rate. It's just a more usable weapon. The Pummeler is the better weapon if you're comparing the two. The Scythe it's starting to grow on me more, especially with the most recent change that it will light enemies on fire. So it's a little bit better versus like those bigger enemies. But until it gets like the better scope and it gets more fire time, I can't really recommend it versus like the Sickle. The Sickle is still the better AR. The Scythe is good. It's in a better spot. It's in the okay territory of B, but oof, it needs more. It needs more Arrowhead. I don't think it necessarily needs more damage. I just want it to be able to fire longer. I just prefer to use the Sickle in almost any situation when I'm comparing the two. Liberator Penetrator. Obviously needs a buff. It's the Adjudicator, but just worse in every way. The Liberator Penetrator needs to have an identity that isn't just the Adjudicator, but worse. Just giving it more damage will just essentially turn it into an Adjudicator, but different. I would like it to have something more unique to it. Maybe like it turns into like a Scalpel, where it does a bunch of durable damage, but doesn't do much upfront damage maybe. And you kind of like pick away the parts of enemies if you're fairly accurate. Like a Brute Commander, maybe it kills all the legs in just a handful of shots if you're accurate, and it will kill them very fast. Or just aiming at the head, it would pop the head really fast, right? Versus the Adjudicator, which is more of like a weapon that maybe you're going to use versus Hunters because it can kill them significantly faster with less bullets. Who knows? I hope it gets something. It's another one of those weapons that just hasn't received any love in the last like 4 months, and it needs something. Normal Liberator is kind of like, I would rather use it over the Scythe. It's okay. Like I say with the other ARs, it just needs more ammo in reserve. It's a good starter weapon, but you quickly just outgrow it and want to use other weapons, and you quickly will just run out of ammo and not feel like you have enough pen or not feel like you have enough killing potential for the higher HP enemies. We'll see where it goes in the future. I hope they continue to give ARs more love because I want to see them utilized more in the harder difficulties. And I think the biggest barrier for that to happen is ammo economy at the moment. Liberator Carbine is just going to be right next to the normal Liberator. It's better in some ways, worse in others. Like the recoil is worse, but the ammo economy is essentially the same. Better fire rate, some more DPS, but let's be honest, you're not going to be full mag dumping this thing because you're going to be out of ammo in like 10 seconds. It's okay. I mean, if it's okay, I mean, part of me just wants to even put it even lower, but like, it's okay. It's like, I can see some people like really enjoying it and maybe bringing it with a supply backpack and, or just having a better ammo economy or tap firing it for like that really fast fire rate, burst fire. But I can't necessarily recommend the Liberator Carbine in its current state, even with the Liberator right there. Like it's in that okay territory where you're going to be working really hard for that same amount of kill, which you could just be using the Cinder Breaker and just like light everything on fire and it falls over. Tenderizer is better than the other ARs in that regard. And I kind of interchange it with the Adjudicator and I look at it very similar. You get more damage per bullet, but you don't have the medium pen. You get more accuracy because of the lower recoil, but you don't get the medium pen. Also, the ammo economy, like the rest of the ARs, is suffering. I hope that we just get more ammo economy because I could absolutely see this to be one of the first ARs that is non-energy, make it into A tier for me if it just had like 2 to 3 additional magazines. So I just don't, like, I feel like I could spray it and not be like feeling bad about it, right? I don't want to just be using it like a designated marksman rifle constantly and having to aim only at weak points. I want to be able to, in some fun, just like spam it. Okay, the Defender is a solid pick. It has the one-handed ability. It has decent damage. It is, in many respects, a better AR than a lot of the weapons. I like that it has the one-handed weapon, especially with the egg missions, or sorry, the Mega Nest having the egg. You would be the person that runs around with that and brings it to the extract. It is fairly useful, being able to turn around while you're running away and shoot at things. Some people don't utilize that. It's fairly good. I do think it needs more love because the Pummeler, which I'll just place right now, is the better option as far as the SMGs go. I find myself just not wanting to use the Defender. The Defender is not like that much worse, but the Defender lacks the CC, and the CC of the Pummeler makes up for like the fact that it has slightly worse, like, bullet velocity and things like that. but I will gladly take lower bullet velocity if I can take the pummeler with slightly less damage and just like CC lock a hunter swarm or CC lock a stalker. Crowd control, for those who don't know what CC means. The knight is in another awkward position. It has a really poor ammo economy still. Maybe doesn't deserve to be in the buff territory, maybe C, but it doesn't quite have enough ammo, even if they do fix the fact that it only gets half reserves on one of the big bricks from the called down resupply. It needs more ammo and reserves. It's fine other than that, but I need to feel like I can use it like a P90 and like hold the trigger down and not have to constantly worry about my ammo and like feel guilty for like full autoing it. You can use it in burst fire, and I do recommend using it if you do really want to use it right now. Burst fire and try to aim for weak points as much as possible. It's fairly good in those conditions, but the ammo economy is just, come on, Arrowhead, fix the ammo economy. It's what is going on? It's been like this since launch. It only gets half reserves, unless you've somehow snuck it in when I wasn't paying attention, but I've not seen it at all or anyone talk about it. The Diligence Counter Sniper it's okay. And the Diligence Counter Sniper and the Diligence are both okay. I would rather use other medium pen weapons for the Diligence Counter Sniper, and I'd rather use other light pen weapons for the Diligence. They're more bot weapons, and I think they're designed to be. The bugs are relentless and always coming towards you in large swarms. I'm not really looking for a precision weapon when I'm dealing with that many enemies up close. And it's not like the Counter Sniper's medium pen really helps it all that much. It requires a lot of shots to kill medium pen enemies. It's okay. Like, it's not like you're like, can't kill anything, and it's fairly useful versus, you know, bird commanders and bile spears. It's not as good as its Dominator or Slugger counterparts if I'm looking at medium pen. And honestly, there's situations where I would rather use the Adjudicator than the Diligent Counter Sniper in that regard, right? So I think there's a lot of leeway with like which one you want to bring as far as like if you wanted to really bring the Diligent Counter Sniper or Adjudicator, but I would just stop the conversation and be like, just bring the Dominator. It's better. All right, Peacemaker is a C+, B-. At the moment, I would rather just use the Redeemer. The Redeemer is like a solid A- pick. It's a great sidearm for those moments where you're just getting swarmed by tons of hunters. Tap fire at their heads. You can take out a ton of enemies really fast with like fairly good like trigger discipline. I really enjoy it. And if you put it in single fire, it's just the Peacemaker, but better. Yes, the Peacemaker does a little bit extra damage, but I would gladly take the larger magazine and more ammo in total than the Peacemaker. The Peacemaker had like additional like 4 or so magazines, and you know, you put a silencer on it, so it's like super stealthy. Maybe, you know, maybe I want to use it more, but I would, if I'm going to use that type of weapon, I'd rather just use the Verdict. Grenade pistol is your like S tier sidearm. I think the ammo economy on it is fantastic now. A lot of people are talking about it like from a position that it got nerfed, but dude, it did not get nerfed. It got a huge buff in its ammo economy, and it far outweighs just losing 2 grenades. It is disgusting, and how good it is now as far as like dealing with spewers. I feel like I actually want to use it versus spewers, and I'm not just wasting ammo because I just know I can resupply and get 4 grenades back instead of just 2 that it previously was, or 1 on a ground brick and 2 on a ground brick now. Like, oh, it's so much better. Such a better spot. It's easily your S tier pick for bugs. It's really nice to just bring like a proper primary weapon, and then I very typically bringing the grenade pistol as my secondary to deal with bug holes, unless my support weapon already does that, like an autocannon. So at that point, maybe I'd bring like the Redeemer or the Verdict, which I'm going to place right next to the Redeemer. It's just an alternative to the Redeemer. You get more damage per shot, but you don't quite get the like massive magazine capacity of the Redeemer. It's a little bit different, but I still do think the Redeemer and the Verdict are like solid A- picks. Like, I do like using them, and they are quite fun, and they're like good sidearms. The Bushwhacker is probably a little bit better than them overall. I do really enjoy using the Bushwhacker as like my Punisher, but in my secondary slot, because essentially has the same damage profile and stagger as the regular Punisher, which means you have tons of knockback at enemies that are coming at you. You get a crap load of damage in your secondary shot per round, and if you spam fire all 3 shells, you can do a ridiculous amount of damage. So I do like the Bushwhacker quite a bit, and do recommend like people trying it out, especially if you're getting surprised by stalkers. This is a great weapon to swap to and just like bully them. It's really fun. Crisper is in an interesting position. Part of me wants to put it like somewhere in the B tier, and you might be like, why? Like like you might have brought into a mission and you like start spraying it, like it doesn't kill anything. It lights them on fire, but like so does the Incinerator Breaker and stuff like that. But the reason why I'm going to put it here is I feel like it deserves to be here if you use it in like a particular circumstance where as you're running away, you light the ground on fire. And as the enemies walk into it, they will light themselves on fire, saving you a ton of time and effort, killing like leapers and scavengers and lighting a lot of enemies on fire that are like higher tier. like your tier 2 Terminids, like Hunters and Warriors. So they don't require as many shots to kill in general. It's fun in that regard, and I think it does deserve to be like higher than like the Peacemaker or other things. And I do believe that strategy works better with the Crisper than the Torture, because at least with the Crisper, I can bring something super effective versus like, you know, the like bigger enemies, and then I'm taking the Crisper for like the smaller enemies, which is interesting. I think it's fairly good. I would like to see maybe a little more ammo for it in the future if possible. Senator is still a great pick for your medium pen solutions. If you're bringing like a light pen primary weapon and you feel like you still need the medium, which many people will, and they're not bringing a medium pen support weapon, like maybe they're bringing a recoilless or something along those lines, the Senator can do some decent work. I would like to see it do a little more damage still versus like the new Bird Commander. Requiring that extra shot to break is unfortunate, but you know, it's still in a fairly good spot if like you need something to deal with your medium pen enemies. It's like the only primary weapon or secondary weapon that can deal with that, other than the grenade pistol. Because remember, the grenade pistol does do a lot of damage and is medium pen, so keep that in mind. Dagger, I think, is like a C. I would rather take the Peacemaker. I almost want to put it like straight down into the needs a buff, but I can see the purpose of it. It's just I feel like its purpose is to be like a scalpel. You need to be incredibly precise and not shoot for too long. But because the fire time before it overheats is so short, and you need to be so precise versus enemies that are moving all over the place, it's not very useful. I would much rather have a weapon that does more damage in general, or a stagger, or does something special than the dagger. Like, I think it has more of a purpose in maybe bot missions, and we'll talk about that more on the next tier list when we do bots. But the dagger needs more fire time, maybe an extra radiator in reserve, and also I feel like it just needs to probably do a little bit more damage. I know they keep upping it, but I think it still deserves more. Throwing knife, just straight down to needs a buff. Now that they have fixed chargers, so flame does not go through a charger's leg, because, you know, it's only a medium pen weapon. Same thing happened to the throwing knife. It's only a medium pen throwable, and it was going through the charger's legs, and that's why it was higher before, but it can't do that anymore. So it's like, what's really the point of this thing? I would love to be able to pick them up. They should do more damage, and I should just have more of them so I can just kind of like be throwing them. You know, I think it would be so much more fun if I had like double of these. I can pick them up and they did more damage. Like, I wanted to be able to, like, if I throw it at a Brood Commander, it rips off his head immediately, right? Like, and I don't want to have to like worry about like a Hive Guardian. I want to be able to one tap them like anywhere. I don't have to be precise. I don't want to have to be precise versus a Hunter. Like, I just want to be able to throw them, and if it hits the Hunter, dude falls over. Right? I don't want to have to be like being very accurate with the throwing knife when they're like all over the place. I want to be able to just kind of throw these and get kills, so that it actually has some amount of purpose. Stun grenade is easily S tier. As far as grenades, there isn't much to be said other than you can easily dispatch a lot more charges this way. It gives you space. Yeah, it's super, super effective. I'm sure some people will still go for the impact, which I think the impact is right up there next to it. I do prefer personally the stun grenade over the impact, just because it helps me with chargers and I can utilize a lot more support weapons, because it just buffs a lot of support weapons. There's a ton of support weapons out there that can kill a charger's butt quite fast, but because of the way chargers are currently designed, they turn around so fast that you don't have much time. This gives you that time. But we'll see. They just came out with a statement yesterday saying that they're going to be reworking chargers in the future. Let's see what happens. Maybe that gives us more time to deal with them, or maybe that just means that like more support weapons will be more useful versus behemoth charges in general. Who knows? Maybe the stun grenade will drop because of that, but in its current context, it is fantastic. Smoke is terrible versus bugs. I don't really have to tell you that. And like, there's like niche scenarios where like maybe smoke can be really useful on a drill mission if you throw, but like the smoke grenade isn't very good because it doesn't have enough radius. If this thing had like double the radius, maybe you could make an argument for like those defense missions to kind of help you out, but I can't recommend. The frag is like a solid C tier. It's just not very good. It needs to have much larger AoE radius, because that's what it does right now. For those who don't know, it's less damage, but it has a larger radius. If it had a much larger radius with that same damage, maybe it'd be more useful, you know, taking out a lot of hunters at the same time. Maybe. Think about it, Airhead. I don't know. But yeah, it definitely needs some love. Damage, radius, anything above, it needs something. High explosive is just a solid B pick. It should do more damage though. If the impact grenade is that instantaneous, you know, thud, I want the high explosive to be one that, like, if I throw, it does more damage, but I have to wait for it, right? I think that'd be a fairly good way to balance out the grenades. I just don't see anyone using the high explosive unless, like, you really hate the impacts, because it's harder to throw in bug holes, I guess. So we'll see in the future what they do there. The incendiary is right there next to the high explosive. Good versus bugs. Throwing at a bug breach, it's like a little mini napalm. Does okay damage on explosion and then fire damage afterwards, which is fairly good, right? Fairly good. But the incendiary impact is just the better option. I'm not going to put it any higher than just a solid A, just because I would rather use the impact overall versus the incendiary impact, because just the sheer damage of the incendiary impact and the fact that the impact can like deal with, you know, like shrieker nests and spore blooms and so on and so forth, because it does have medium plus pen. Yeah, we'll see in the future what they do to impacts versus regular grenades, but I still think that regular grenades just need more of a boost, and maybe like the incendiary impact could use also a little bit more of a boost, maybe the fire lasting longer. So thermite, I'm going to put it actually down in needs a buff, but I've been thinking about maybe putting in C tier, because if you utilize it as like a mop-up kind of weapon, so you throw it at an already weak Bile Titan, technically it's okay, but I wouldn't recommend that. For those who don't know, the thermite doesn't do quite enough damage at the moment, as you probably already know. And on top of that, if you throw 2 back to back, the thermite does not stack. Only the original thermite, the one that lands first, will do its damage over time. The second one will not add to that damage over time, as tested after this recent patch. So what I would do is make sure that's working, and then also I would double its damage over time. I want to see it actually killing chargers if I throw it at its leg. If I throw one of these at its leg and it's sticking to its leg, after like the 8 seconds it takes until it blows up, that charger should fall over after 8 seconds. I think that would make the thermites very good. And it would also solve our problem of chargers just being super obnoxious at times, right? If you don't bring the right loadout. So please give thermite some love. Arrowhead, it deserves it. Okay, looking through our tier list, is there anything that I maybe want to move around? I feel pretty confident with where I've placed stuff at the moment. Please let me know down below what you guys think, or drop by the stream. I'm sure you've been seeing people talking while I've been recording this video. I feel quite good about it. Just remember, you know, just because I think these things deserve in these positions and so on and so forth, doesn't mean that they like don't have certain niches that they fill that might make them S tier for you, or A tier for you, or B tier for you, right? Just because you don't utilize the weapon in that regard doesn't mean that it isn't as good, or it, you know, so on and so forth, right? This is just my perspective on things, and let me know what you guys think about the individual placements. I think I've put them pretty fairly. I think if I had to just close out this video, my number one concern would just be for ARs in general. I just want them to have more overall ammo economy in general in the game, not just for tier 10. They seem to be lacking behind like their other alternatives, especially if they keep adding shotguns that, you know, require so much less accuracy, but do twice as much, you know, damage per shot, right? Or like for like every ounce of effort, you get so much more out of these shotguns. So yeah. But yeah, as I said, let me know down below, what are you guys running? What kind of loadouts are you doing? You know, do you agree with it? Do you disagree with it? Let me know. Link down below is a Discord. It's my Twitch link as well. You can come by the stream and talk to me firsthand. I stream mornings, NA and EU. I'll be playing lots of Helldivers still going forward, but also like sprinkling in some variety from here and there, and getting excited for Space Marines too. So yeah, much love YouTube. Thank you for watching. Consider dropping a like and comment down below. Bye everybody.